Pests, in one form or another, might honestly be one of the oldest feuds on the planet. Insects have been chewing on plant tissue for somewhere around 400 million years, which means bugs were already running their little operations long before the first dinosaur ever took a step. And obviously, long before anyone thought growing their own tomatoes was a good weekend hobby. And in all that time, an entire underground war has quietly developed between plants and the things that want to eat them. A war so layered, so sneaky, and honestly so well organized that most of us, even folks who've been gardening for decades, only ever catch the tiniest sliver of it. In other words, no bugs, no coevolution, no defenses, and frankly, no gardening hobby for any of us to obsess over in the first place. So maybe thank a beetle today. And while it's easy to glance at a wilted squash plant or a leaf full of holes and just file it under pest problem, the truth is that what you're actually staring at is the visible tip of something a lot stranger. Plant signal, insect scheme. Other insects eavesdrop on both of them. And by the time you, the gardener, notice that something's off, the story has usually already been unfolding for days, sometimes longer. So this naturally raises the question, when a pest actually hits your garden, what is going on, really? And the answer is, drumroll please, you were probably already a few steps behind. But that's a behind with an asterisk, because in a lot of cases, your plant wasn't behind at all. You see, there's growing evidence that some plants can pick up on an attack before a single bite ever lands. In a handful of experiments, researchers played back the specific vibration pattern of a caterpillar chewing, with no actual caterpillar anywhere nearby, and the plants still ramped up their chemical defenses afterward, almost like they were bracing for impact. So when people picture a pest hitting a garden, the more accurate picture might be a plant that started reacting to the vibration of chewing, not the chewing itself, which is a pretty wild thought, considering we don't usually think of a tomato plant as something with anything resembling a nervous system, let alone the ability to flinch. And once a plant has actually been bitten into, things get even stranger. Because some plants don't just sit there and take it quietly. They call for backup. A damaged leaf can release a cocktail of airborne chemicals, and in certain cases, those chemicals are specifically built to attract the natural enemies of whatever's currently eating the plant. There's research showing that leaves under attack from leaf miners will pump out compounds like a substance called ZEED, 3-hexanol, which acts almost like a beacon, drawing in parasitic wasps that then go and deal with the leaf miner problem directly. So in a very real sense, your garden already has its own emergency hotline, and it's been calling it long before you ever picked up a spray bottle. Now, not every pest hit is just about eating either. Some of them are closer to a delivery system in disguise. Take the cucumber beetle. On the surface, it looks like it's just doing what beetles do, chewing through cucumber, melon, or squash leaves. But underneath that, it can be quietly carrying bacterial wilt in its gut the entire time, and every bite becomes a chance to leave behind contaminated waste right on a fresh wound, which is exactly why a plant can be perfectly watered, perfectly healthy-looking one afternoon, and then just collapse a few days later. The beetle damage was never really the main event. It was the delivery truck. And speaking of things hiding in plain sight, here's where the story takes a turn that a lot of gardeners never see coming. Aphids are usually treated like background noise, just little green dots clinging to. But aphids are frequently not working alone. Ants will tend aphids the way a farmer tends livestock, feeding on the sugary honeydew, the aphid defending them from predators, physically relocating them to fresher plants when a stem gets picked clean, and in some particularly committed setups, ants will even shelter root-feeding aphids inside their own nests, underground, completely out of sight. So when you find aphid on a plant, you're not just looking at a pest, You might be eating at livestock with bodyguards. And just to make things a bit more unsettling, aphids don't exactly need much time to become a problem either. Many species reproduce without ever mating at all, meaning a single aphid can essentially already be carrying the next generation inside her before she's even settled on your plant. So one aphid showing up isn't really one aphid. It's closer to a single seed of a factory that's about to switch on. Now, some pests skip the subtlety entirely and just go straight for the plumbing. The squash vine borer is a great example of this, because the actual damage isn't happening where you'd expect. The larva tunnels directly into the stem and feeds through the inside of it, essentially clogging the plant's own water lines from within, which is why a squash plant can wilt dramatically even when the soil underneath it is perfectly moist. The real giveaway usually isn't the bug at all, since you'll rarely see it. It's the small pile of sawdust-like frass sitting near the base of the stem, which is basically the only clue left behind that something has been quietly hollowing the plant out from the inside. Leaf miners run a similar playbook, just one layer up. Those squiggly pale trails you sometimes see winding through a leaf aren't scratches on the surface. They're tunnels, carved between the top and bottom layers of the leaf itself, with the insect feeding the entire time it travels, which also explains why spraying the surface of an infested leaf so often does basically nothing. The pest was never on the leaf to begin with. It was inside it. And then there are pests that pull off something almost theatrical, in that they make it look like the plant simply died of its own accord. Cutworms feed almost exclusively at night, slicing young seedlings off right at the soil line, then retreating into the soil or nearby debris during the day to hide. So gardeners tend to wake up to a row of seedlings that have just vanished or toppled over, with absolutely no insect anywhere in sight. You get the crime scene. You almost never get the criminal standing over it. Now, of course, gardeners haven't been completely defenseless against all this scheming, and we've come up with a few tools of our own, even if they're nowhere near as elegant as a plant calling in parasitic wasps. Yellow sticky traps, for instance, aren't really there to single-handedly wipe out an infestation, and on their own, they generally don't, since eggs and earlier life stages usually stay safely tucked away on the plant itself. What they're actually good for is intelligence gathering, showing you hotspots in the garden, rough timing of when certain pests are becoming active, and sometimes even hinting at which direction an infestation is migrating in from, whether that's a patch of drying weeds or a neighboring field. So think of them less as a weapon and more as a tripwire. And then there's reflective mulch, which works on a completely different principle than most pest control, because it's not poisoning anything or trapping anything. It's leaning on the fact that a lot of small flying pests, thrips especially, navigate largely by sight. A reflective surface underneath young plants can throw that navigation off just enough to meaningfully cut down on thrips landing there, which matters more than it sounds like, since thrips are also a major way certain plant viruses get spread around in the first place. So in a weird way, the mulch isn't really feeding or protecting the plant directly. It's just quietly messing with a bug's GPS. So when you put all of this together, the plant calling for help, the beetle moonlighting as a disease courier, the ants running aphid farms underground, the borers and miners working from the inside out, the cutworms striking and vanishing before sunrise. It starts to paint a pretty different picture of what's actually happening every time something hits your garden. It's almost never just one creature making one simple decision to eat. It's usually several overlapping systems, some chemical, some social, some almost architectural, all running at once, mostly invisible to us, with the plant itself often being a far more active participant than it gets credit for. And honestly, When you consider that ants have basically been running their own version of organized agriculture for millions of years. Before we ever figured out how to plant a row of corn in a straight line, it does make you wonder who the real farmers in your backyard actually are. Thanks for watching, and until next time.